The Edmonton Oilers picked up one of their best wins of the season, a 4-0 shutout over the Boston Bruins. All that and a whole lot more on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's show, all things 4-0 win over the Bruins. The nice effort from the supporting cast, the new look third line, which we'll get into a little more in depth. We'll talk about the goaltending, which was great tonight, and why this win is a good sign. So starting at the top, they're not all pretty. It is not always going to be a Rembrandt or a Hendricks in putting together a win. When you got to play 82 of these over 6.5 months, your goal is to win something in the ballpark of 45 to 55. You win 55 games, you're going to have a chance at the President's Trophy. You win 45 games and then you lose, 7 or 8 in overtime. That's enough most years. You finish with 97, 98 standings points. That'll be enough to get you in the postseason. But we get very caught up in the singular games and trying to weave them together. I really enjoy doing that in terms of trying to weave a narrative together of how one game flows into the next, how a certain player is playing, how all of the players together really dictates the flow of the season. And they're not all easy. You're not going to get a lot of games like this over the course of a long season. You think about the environmental factors, you think about the fact that they're in the Eastern Standard Time Zone, their body clocks are off 2 hours of what they're normally used to. You've been in a hotel for the last 2 days. You probably haven't gotten as good of sleep as you would get at home. And they came out tonight and played one of their best games of the entire season. And you got right out in front reasonably early, like you like to, Adam Henrique on that new look third line, which we're going to get to in a minute. And we spent a lot of time talking about on yesterday's edition of Locked On Oilers. But you get that first goal against a Boston team that, like we talked about on yesterday's show, really struggles to score. And you immediately get Boston behind the 8-ball. You get a goal from a secondary source. You get an Adam Henrique goal. You go up 1-0, 6.5 minutes into this game. From there, the Bruins are instantly desperate because this is a team, as we know, that's averaging about 2.6 goals per game. So if you're the Oilers and you score first, the Bruins are going to have a really hard time scoring 3 straight goals because that's a third of a goal above their season average. And that represents about 1 goal every third game would give you that 0.3 goals to get you to 3. So instantly, you get out to that first goal, you put yourself in a good position to be able to take advantage of the environment. And the Bruins, to their credit, did not fold in this game. But I do think the Bruins' lack of depth, and I think fundamentally their lack of talent, was just too much for them to be able to overcome tonight. They really just did not have the puck a whole lot. And much credit to Jeremy Swayman, who I know he's on the ledger for 3 goals against and then the empty netter. But at the very least, man, he kept them in that game as long as he physically could to try and give his team a chance to get one. And we talk about it a lot. If you're only down 2-0, 1 goal fundamentally alters everything and you can easily get back in it. But tonight, much to their credit, the Oilers played a very possession-heavy game. They had a lion's share of the offense in all phases. They had a good special teams night as well. And you weave all of that together and you add up all of those components to a victory. And 4-0 seems light. Like I had just said, Jeremy Swayman deserves a lot of credit for how well he played tonight. And I know the underlying numbers aren't going to be ridiculously friendly to a goalie who gives up 3. But if you go by Evolving Wild, Evolving Wild had the Oilers credited with 5.1 expected goals, and to only concede 3, that's a pretty good game. To concede to steal 2 goals above the goals saved above expected in a game your team loses 4-0 is very frustrating. And Jeremy Swayman has not had a great start to his season. We talked about that quite a bit on yesterday's edition of Locked On Oilers in the final segment when we were previewing the Bruins game, that not having a training camp, not having a preseason, signing that long-term extension the first day of the regular season and instantly getting thrown into the fire, it's really challenging for a goalie without a rhythm. And when you have the opportunity that the Oilers did today and you are trying some things out in your lineup and you get rewarded, there's been quite a bit of conjecture over the last 2 weeks about Adam Henrique's production. He only had 3 goals coming into the game tonight against the Bruins, and lo and behold, you throw Zach Hyman on his wing, you throw Jeff Skinner on his wing. They're able to get him an even strength goal, which he does not have a lot of this year. And then later on in the game, you're able to get another Adam Henrique even strength goal play with assists from Skinner and Hyman. Getting 2 5-on-5 goals from your third line is really encouraging because, like we've talked about a lot, the Oilers need, on occasion, their supporting cast to pick up some slack. And the way this team is constructed, we know that the superstars have to do a lot of the heavy lifting. But on a night where Draisaitl was pointless, McDavid had 1 goal, to get 2 from Henrique and then the empty netter from Arvidsson, that just shows you that the Oilers have quite a bit of dimension to their team. They were able to withstand Joshua Brown drawing in for Troy Stecher. That's something that I think I overlooked while watching the game, that I didn't really feel it was that noticeable that Joshua Brown was out there, even though in Brown's previous stints up at the NHL level this season, he really kind of stuck out like a sore. He stood out. Excuse me, stuck is not a word. He stood out like a sore thumb. I was very unimpressed with what I had seen from him, and tonight, he was perfectly adequate. I'm not rushing to throw Joshua Brown into the mix as far as a playoff roster spot, but he didn't kill them tonight. And the last thing I want to hit on in this first segment is the Skinner Henrique Hyman line. They were credited with 3 5-on-5 shots for, 2 shots against. They were credited with 2 goals for. They were credited with 0.29 expected goals for, 0.16 expected goals against. They were credited with 1 high danger chance, and they conceded 0 high danger chances. And Henrique went from 3 goals on the season to 5 goals on the season in one night. And I'm not saying Henrique is poised for some explosion, but I do think there's some meat on that bone. And I think that's really one of the storylines I'm most curious about going into the second half of the season, is trying to understand where the Oilers have room for positive regression. And one of those candidates is Adam Henrique. We've said Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, we've said Jeff Skinner, we've said Victor Arvidsson. Adam Henrique absolutely is capable of scoring 8 to 10 goals over the final 40-something games of the regular season and ending up in the ballpark of 13 or 14. That's not inconceivable if he has a strong second half, especially considering he doesn't shoot the puck a whole lot. So when he does get good looks, generally speaking, he's going to put them in. You know, he scored 2 goals on 2 shots on goal tonight. And when you get that from your depth guys, that's really encouraging as a coach and as a general manager, that you just have multiple paths to victory. And that's really the key. You want to have as many ways to beat the other team as you possibly can. We're going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we're going to highlight the goaltending, which was sublime tonight, coming up after this. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. If you're looking at the slate this weekend, we kick off Saturday afternoon, the Chargers at the Texans, where the Chargers are 2.5-point road playoff favorites, which is a bit of an outlier. Later in the night, the Steelers heading to Baltimore, where the Ravens are 9.5-point favorites. But in my opinion, the best game of the weekend, Sunday, 4:30, the Green Bay Packers, Jordan Love coming off the injury scare in Week 17, heading to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles, where the Eagles are 4.5-point favorites. It is a jam-packed football slate this weekend, and you can visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoffs unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we're breaking down the team's 4-0 win over the Bruins. And I dedicated a good chunk of yesterday's episode diagnosing the Bruins' woes, and it really jumped out to me watching them for the second time in less than a week. They played the Rangers last Thursday, and the Bruins just have no juice offensively. It is a massive struggle for them, even on the power play, to really create dangerous offense. It is a lot of dump and chase. It's a lot of one and dones. They don't really generate sustained offensive zone time all that well. And that plays into what the Oilers want to do. If you're going to tell the Oilers, we only have to defend in short spurts, if you're going to tell the Oilers, hey, Stuart Skinner's only going to have to make 20-something saves, he's not going to have to make a ton of crazy saves, and he's going to have a lot of one scoring chance from the perimeter, he's going to get himself in front of it, and that's going to be the end of it. And I do want to give Skinner credit. You know, the injury bump was scary. That type of play happens infrequently, I would say, in the NHL, where an attacking player driving the net, carrying the puck, collides with the goaltender. And I don't want to turn this into a referendum on Nikita Zadorov, who I do find amusing as a person because he's one of the few NHL players who's willing to be candid in his thoughts about his game, the people he plays against, and the league at large. But this is a guy we all know that occasionally does go over that line in trying to be physical and trying to be intimidating. And that's one of the components and one of the real reasons the Bruins brought him in my opinion, was the Bruins, when they've been at their most functional over the last decade, it's been when they play with that forechecky, grindy, snarly style, and the big defenseman archetype. You know, you include Chara, Johnny Boychuk, Seidenberg. They've had their fair share of the big boys on that back end. And of course, Zadorov's outlier tall, you know, at 6'6", but I don't like that play. And it's going to sound very whiny. It's going to sound very whatever pejorative whatever pejorative you want to use to call me soft. But I hate that play because he's not really trying to score. He's driving the net with the puck and he bangs into the goalie, knocks his helmet off, and Skinner has to get pulled. And I also don't want to turn this into a referendum on the NHL's concussion policy and their concussion spotters, but you can't tell me you accurately diagnosed Stuart Skinner in the 15-20 minutes you had. I know Pickard came in. The Oilers didn't concede a shot on goal against during the time Pickard was in the game, and Skinner came back out to start the next period. But I understand that as somebody who is not a medical doctor, who is not a professional hockey player, who's in that decision-making process or in that room, that I don't maybe understand all of the components of how that protocol is put together. But as a person, if I think someone might have had a concussion, I think there's a strong argument you just don't let that guy go back into the game because you want to do as much testing as you possibly can. You know, I hate to do back in my day, but once upon a time, yeah, I did get a concussion playing football and I felt really woozy for quite a while. I ended up going to the hospital. The concussion test took probably 45 minutes, half hour, something in that ballpark. I remember getting a CT scan to make sure I didn't have any brain damage or anything, but I really struggle to think that that test that the independent concussion spotter is performing is fully capable of diagnosing the scope of the symptoms, especially considering that player is going to be bothering you to get back in the game as soon as they walk into the room, because more often than not, that player doesn't want to come out of the game to begin with. So when the concussion spotter pops them to come out of the game, they're already in a pissed off mood. So they're going to be speeding through it as fast as they possibly can. Now, to highlight the hockey, Skinner was really good tonight. He made quite a few really, really quality saves. If you look at the shot maps, we're talking 3 or 4 grade A chances within 5 to 10 feet of the net, and he was able to make the kick saves. He made that one save where the puck was to his left, hit right if you're looking at him on TV, and he was already on his side, but he was able to kick his legs back across the net mouth and stop. I think it was Brad Marchand who had tried a jam play. I believe that was in the third period. And Marchand had 2 or 3 really good looks on that sequence. And Skinner, to his credit, even after maybe being concussed, was able to make those plays. And as we say all the time here on Locked On Oilers, if Stuart Skinner only needs to be a guy on this team, the Oilers are going to have a lot of possibilities. If they need Stuart Skinner to be the guy to steal them a game, it's going to be awfully challenging for him to be able to do that just because he doesn't profile as that type of goalie. And when the Oilers are at their best, they're not playing a whole lot of defense. They are in transition. They are up and down, up and down. They're putting heat on the other team. And tonight was a great example of that. They were able to use their speed to create offensive zone time, I should say, and take advantage of the fact the Bruins are a very slow team. When you have a marked speed advantage against an opponent and you have the opportunity to really use transition to your advantage to create just zone time, and we know zone time is the building block of quality offense. And yes, statistically speaking, high danger chances are more likely to come off of the rush than off of sustained offensive zone time, because you need to string together more successful passes in a row to be able to generate a high danger chance off of a forecheck sequence. But when you have sustained, where you have a 5 or 6 shot advantage for 2 periods, you have a multi-goal lead, and you feel that other team's desperation as they're flailing in the deep end of the pool, trying to keep their head above the water. And the Oilers very confidently, they brought them out to that deeper water. You know, Dan Campbell, the Lions coach, used that metaphor. I believe it was on Hard Knocks before the season last year, talking about the idea of we're good in the shallow end. We can tread water forever. A lot of people are comfortable in the shallow end, but the deeper that water gets, even some people who are reasonably good swimmers, they start to get antsy. And tonight, the Oilers dragged the Bruins into the deep end of the pool, and the Bruins could not float. They could not tread water, and the Oilers very much systemically dissected them over the course of 60 minutes and made this one of their most convincing victories of the entire season. When you have a 1-for-3 night on the power play, you kill off the Bruin penalties, you don't give up a whole lot of offense to begin with, and when you do, your slightly above average goalie makes a couple of really nice saves, you get a dominating victory like the Oilers had tonight. We're going to take one more break on today's show. We're going to tie a bow on this game coming up right after this. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, or comedy. One of my favorite memories of this past year was going to Gov Ball Sunday, seeing Chapel Road, seeing SZA. Just one of the great concert experiences of my life. Went with one of my best friends. It was the day after Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final, if I remember correctly. The vibes at a show like that are just tremendous. And the only place I buy tickets to get to games, to get to shows, is through the Gametime app. And Gametime's made it even easier for you to get tickets to your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. My friends and I were trying to talk about what I wanted to do for my birthday early next month, and we settled on probably going to Golden Knights Devils at the Prudential Center. And with Game Time, we found some good deals, and we're going through our options. And most importantly, we can see the view from our seats before buying tickets on the app. The Super Deal was particularly impressive and offered a great seat at an unbeatable price. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. We will have an episode for you ahead of Oilers Penguins, so I probably won't end up talking about that game all that much right now. And then we'll have a recap episode for you on Friday to go into the weekend ahead of a Hockey Night in Canada game. But this is one of those wins where if something special ends up happening down the road, this is one of those games that's going to stick in your brain. You'll talk about this game. You'll talk about that first Ottawa game, the game Zach Hyman got injured in, and the Oilers hung a 5 spot on them and won in very convincing fashion. You'll talk about the wins against Vegas and the wins against Minnesota. It is hard to string together good victories in the NHL because the margins are very small, and that's not necessarily a reflection on the quality of teams in the NHL, but it is a reflection of the volatility of hockey. And I don't think hockey as a sport gets enough credit for how random and how many variables go into a given game. And that's what gives it its chaotic energy. That's what makes it so unbelievably difficult to predict, even with the army of stats that we have at our fingertips now. When you've seen me do an episode of Locked On Oilers where we do a full in-depth player profile, we did one on Adam Henrique last week. We did one a few weeks ago on Jeff Skinner. We've done them on Kasperi Kapanen, on Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. We've done them on Darnell Nurse. And you have the opportunity to look at a player's line mates, partners, the quality of their competition, their ice time, in what situations of 5-on-5, power play, penalty kill, where they start, offensive, defensive zone, on the fly, neutral zone. We can talk about the underlying numbers, scoring chances, expected goals, high danger chances. We can talk about goals saved above expected from a goalie's perspective. And even with all of that data, one individual game can really buck what a season-long average or trend would incline you to think about a given player or a given team. Now, sometimes, like tonight, for instance, it's a little bit easier to sift through the data, to match it up with what you watched on TV, and to get a full encompassing perspective on a game. And I don't think the Oilers are going to be mistaken for like the 2002 New Jersey Devils. They don't have that. They don't have a Niedermeyer. They don't have a Scott Stevens. They do have an Evan Bouchard. They do have a Matthias Ekholm. And you know what's funny? I forgot to mention this earlier, but I wanted to bring this up because I wrote it down in my notes. The way I knew this game was going the Oilers' way was that one breakaway the Bruins had, I think it was in the third period, it might have been in the second, I forget, where Bouchard fumbled the puck at the blue line and a Bruin skater went in unimpeded, just him on Skinner, and Skinner made the save. And we talked about it the other day, and when Bouchard has made that mistake this year, it feels like at least 6 or 7 of those have ended up in the back of the Oilers' net. And on a night like this, to get the big save in that situation, to fully stomp out the Bruins' ability to come back, and hell, we didn't even talk about the fact that Corey Perry took a dumb fight with Trent Frederick. That's how little that fight mattered. And when you're up in a game, you really don't want to do that if you're Corey Perry. And look, I am not in a position to tell Corey Perry, who's got a Hall of Fame resume, when to and when not to fight. The referees got it right. They gave Trent Frederick an extra 2 minutes for roughing because he kept carrying on, trying to goad Perry into the fight. And eventually Perry acquiesced, but Perry lost the fight. It didn't matter. The Bruins do not have the juice to pull 2 or 3 straight goals out of nowhere. These are not the same old Bruins. no Bergeron, no Krejci, reduced versions of Hampus Lindholm and Brandon Carlo, no depth to speak of whatsoever. There is no reinforcements coming. This is a very, very limited team that can only win close games on their goaltending and their defense. And that's simply the hardest way to live. You know, at the end of the last segment, we were talking about the idea of the Oilers having multiple paths to victory, where if they need to win a squeaker, their defense can tighten up, their offense can typically control a game enough where the defense doesn't have to do too much of the work to be able to win 3-2. They can win that 7-6, 6-5 game where it's up and down, back and forth. The Oilers are more than comfortable trading chances back and forth. And then a game like tonight, the Bruins made a handful of mistakes. The Oilers converted them. And sometimes it is that simple. And I know it's very hard in the course of a long season to rectify the variance within hockey that we started this segment talking about. But this is one of those nights. You feel good about everything you got out of tonight. And look, we can deal with maybe Skinner starts suffering from post-concussion syndromes. What are we going to do with the third line? What's the deal with Troy Stetcher? Is he okay? Is Joshua Brown moonlighting, or is he getting an honest look at maybe sticking in the lineup? There's a lot to consider as far as what to take away from this game and to think about going forward. But in the moment, that is one of the best wins the Oilers are going to have all season. And you didn't get anything out of Draisaitl, and he took a penalty, so maybe the Leon Lady Bing conversation, unfortunately, is going to tamp down a smidge. He had gone 30-some-odd games without taking a penalty since, I believe it was the Flyers game. That first time was when he had started that penalty-less game streak. But you feel good about the Oilers right now. They're playing 700 winning percentage points hockey this late in the season. And look, obviously, I don't expect the Oilers to continue to play this well for this long. You know, they're at 663 points percentage right now. They've been a 750 points percentage team for about, I would say, 6 weeks now, since about mid-November. They're 4 points back of the Vegas Golden Knights. They've played one more game than the Vegas Golden Knights. They're up to a plus 23 goal differential. They're 7-2-1 in their last 10. They have really started to put it together. And sitting here at 25-12-3 through 40 games, it's hard not to feel like this is one of the best, if not the best team in the Western Conference. And I know Vegas has been ahead of them for most of this season. I know the Kings have been ahead of them for most of this season. But the Oilers have a lot of room to keep getting better. And that's what excites me so much about this team going forward. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please, please, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell. We're shooting for 2,000 subs by the start of the NHL playoffs in mid-April. It's doable, but I do need to get more people on board. So that way, God willing, when there's a parade in late June, over that 2,000 subs mark, and everybody can revel in the happiness, but gotta get there first. I will talk to you guys ahead of the Penguins game tomorrow. I will see you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers.